was your father, Rube Smelser,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah,
And you mentioned earlier in our conversation that about an uncle of yours, your dad's brother,
yeah.
and he was about 18, I suppose, when y'all came to this area.
Well, no, they're younger now.
Younger than that.
Yeah. Now they spent the first winter in this dugout over on the old Uncle Tom Zickfuss place, and they found then the next spring a 160 acres over in the West Basin that the McElhaney's had homesteaded, and they didn't want to improve it. Uh, they didn't want to live there. So my grandfather uh, homesteaded it. Evidently, the McElhaney's had staked it, but they never did claim it. So my grandfather and grandmother and my dad and his brother and sisters moved into the West Basin on this new homestead, and they all farmed, raised cotton and corn. Uh, my father at that time was about 14, 15, and his Jesse, the one that died that winter, was 19. My dad about 15. Treve was about 12, and Moore, Maud Smelser had married George Moore in Missouri on their way here. So they lived with my grandparents. And then Alice, the other sister, married Warren Willett, and they put in a little grocery store on the north side of the road at Basin.
Oh, I see.
Uh-huh. All right. When Dad was out in the field, my mother could see him from the Greenwood place from a window upstairs. So my mother would go upstairs and look out the window at my father plowing the field across the road. And they went to the same West Basin school. So they fell in love, but they had to be 21 and 18, so they had to wait to get married until Mother got 18. And they caught a train over at Mannford that went up the Pawnee every morning, and then and they got married in 1908, I believe. And then they caught the same train back that evening. And they took over the farm. My grandfather and grandmother moved to Mannford, which was growing by that time, and they built a house in Mannford and turned the old homestead over to my mother and father. And every time they passed this Wiggs place, going to the literary or the school in East Basin, every time they passed the Wiggs place, they said, "We'll own this place someday. This is the best land in this country, and some of these days we'll buy this place." So sure enough, in 1924, Mr. Wiggs was old, and his circulation got bad in his legs. And the doctors told him they'd have to cut his legs off to save his life. And Mr. Wiggs said, "No, I was born with two legs, and I'll die with two legs." But he couldn't work the farm anymore. So he sold it to my mother and father in 1924. And I was born in that big house that year. Since there was no doctors around, Mrs. Sarah Johnson, the widow of Joe Mitchell, used to be married to Joe Mitchell that owned the Basin store. Well, she had married Mr. Johnson, and he had even died. She came over and was a midwife and delivered me on a hot summer day in 24. So in 1930 then, the Depression hit. And there was no jobs, no money, no nothing. We were selling 200-pound hogs for $3. We sold 500-pound calves for $10. And it got worse and worse to where President Roosevelt closed the banks one day. He got on the radio and announced that all banks in the United States would be closed. All your money was wiped out. We're cleaning the books and going to start up from zero. So therefore, since all the money was wiped out and the banks were closed, all the companies went broke too. They shut down. It seemed like it was 3 or 4 months later that they opened the banks up new and companies sold new stock, and people had no money. They started out new. Hundreds of stockbrokers and rich people in Wall Street in New York and Chicago and all jumped out of windows, committed suicide because they were wiped out, and were even falling on pedestrians on the sidewalk. They had to blockade the sidewalks off to keep pedestrians from walking because so many people was jumping out of the windows because they had been wiped out in the crash.
You had mentioned your father had taken a load of hogs to Sand Springs?
Yeah.
Before President Roosevelt had declared the banks closed.
Yeah, the day that the president closed the banks. We had started early that morning before daylight, hauling about 10 hogs at a time in our old trailer to old man Zimmerman, a German butcher, between Sand Springs and Tulsa down on the Arkansas River. And so we came back and got another 10 and took them down, and was going to haul 200 that day and sell them for $3 a piece. So about noon, we pulled in down there with another load of hogs, and he come running out and he said, Mr. Smelser, you're going to have to take these hogs back home. And Dad said, well, I can't take these hogs back home. We're out of corn. We've fed them all the corn we've got. And he said, well, Roosevelt closed the banks a while ago. I can't write you a check. I can't pay you for these hogs. What do we do? Dad said, go get a pencil and paper and write on there, Mr. Smelser, I owe you $3 a hog for 200 hogs, and sign your name to it. Dad said, if the banks ever open up, well, I'll get my money for these hogs. And if the banks never open up, we'll all starve to death anyway. We don't need no money or no papers or nothing else. So about 3 months later, when they opened the banks up new, well, we got our money. And that had to last a year. That was our income for a whole year till we got another crop and another batch of hogs to sell.
Mr. Smelser, was the Depression years always drought years in this area, or some years